listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the tough biblical questions, because we will dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us today. Certainly do appreciate that. I am being extremely well supervised and monitored.
Yes, he is. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Myra's here, and Susie's here, and Susie being the 17-week-old pup. So if you're wondering, and I know some of you are, she is a mountain cur, which basically they believe this breed were the original dogs that the Spanish brought over to the New World. They don't get real big. A lot of people use them to hunt squirrels or raccoons, but they make very, very good farm dogs as well. So that's what she is. If you like what you hear, don't be afraid of the share buttons, the like buttons, and all those good things. They'll help us make it easier for people to find us. That's what they're there for. If you haven't been to GiveGod90.com lately, you may want to check that out. Check out author Jerry Mitchell if you're interested in the books. They're there. Some interesting things coming up from that as well. So all that kind of good stuff's going on. And I'm going to jump in and get started tonight because, when I started looking at what I'm going to look at, and I've wanted to find a way to talk about this in a way that's not very technical, but at the same time gives you the information you need to know. And I think I found it, maybe. There's a saying I learned when I was young, and it's basically the victorious write the history books. And if you think about that, it's true. Doesn't matter whether you're talking about the Greeks, the Romans, you get to write the history books if you win. If you look at more recent history, Custer's Last Stand, even though the Sioux Nation basically won that battle, they lost a lot more than the war. And for a long, long time, the Americans, the white Americans, wrote the history books for it. It wasn't until recently that a lot of the words from the natives got included. A lot of their accounts became included not too long ago. And it really doesn't matter if we're talking about war. Doesn't matter if we're talking about a business deal. We get most of the information from the winning side. And the Bible is really no different. Now, here's a spoiler alert. Are you ready for this? God wins. Okay? That's right. God wins. So not only does he get to write the history, but he wrote the future as well. And tonight we're going to look at Psalm 110, concentrating primarily on the first verse. It's not long. It's only 7 verses, and Myra's going to be reading from the International Children's Bible because I like it, and it's a reasonably good translation of this.
The Lord said to my master, "Sit by me at my right side until I put your enemies under your control. The Lord will make you king in Jerusalem over all nations, and you will rule your enemies in all their own countries. Your people will join you on the day you come to power. You have been dressed in holiness from birth. You have the freshness of a child. The Lord has made a promise and will not change his mind. He said, 'You are a priest forever, and a priest like Melchizedek. The Lord is beside you to help you. When he becomes angry, he will crush kings. He will judge those nations, filling them with dead bodies. He will defeat rulers all over the world. The king will drink from the brook on the way. Then he will be strengthened and win the battle.'" Psalms 110.
So, see, I told you, he wins. We can all go home now, right? If we look at the first verse, most of the English translations, excuse me, most of the English translations, it reads, "The Lord said to my Lord," right? Yeshua, Jesus, uses this to confuse the Pharisees in Matthew 22 and Mark 12. In the New Testament, when the Pharisees asked, whose son is the Messiah, Yeshua turns it around on them, and they weren't able to answer. They weren't able to respond. But why? In English, and in a lot of Christian traditions, it's like, well, this is easy. Well, not so fast. It's more straightforward in the original language. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the word Lord with what was actually written. Okay, the first word Lord, usually all in capital letters, means that it's a transcript of the Tetragrammaton, the 4 Hebrew letters that make up the name of God. Now, I'm not going to get into the pronunciation, but regular listeners know I use Jehovah because the people who researched this, right, they found in the Masoretic text, with all the vowel points, the Yud He Vav He with all the vowels that make up the name, and they have done all the work, they've done all the things, and that's the way that the scholars say this is pronounced, the Hebrew scholars. So that's the first word. What about the second Lord? In the International Children's Bible, it's translated as Master. What is it? Well, exactly what it says is Adoni, which is a form of Adonai. You might be familiar with that. It's the Hebrew word for Lord or Master. It's a title of great respect. David writes it as Adoni because that is the conjugation for my Lord. But, it is the same title. It just is possessive. Not getting into grammar lessons here either. So what we have in the first verse is Yehovah said to my Lord, or to my Master. So we know who is speaking, and we have a pretty good idea who he might be speaking to. But what he says next is what most people miss. Sit at my right hand until. So what he's saying is something's going to happen in the future, right? Well, what's going to happen? The enemies of the one being spoken to by Jehovah will be defeated. He will put them under his control. So here's a question that needs to be answered. Has that happened yet? Here's a spoiler alert. Not yet. Not yet. And I know there's some of you out there screaming, of course it has. Because God said it's true. And because whatever he says happens, and that's just as good as it's already happened. Well, there's a problem with that. You can't have it both ways. When God says something's going to happen in our future, just because he says it's going to happen, he knows how it's going to happen, doesn't mean that for us it has happened yet. Did I say that clear enough? Okay. So if it hasn't happened for us yet, then it hasn't happened. It's that simple. And we could say, well, where is he? If his enemies are defeated, where is he? Because there's still enemies of the one being spoken to in the world today. You just don't get to have it both ways. The enemies of our Creator are still trying their best to win as many of the little battles as they can because they already know they're going to lose the war and much, much more. David writes in verse 4, the Lord, all in capital letters, has sworn. Jehovah has sworn he will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of the Melchizedek, the righteous king. Many people believe that to have been Shem, Noah's son. He has sworn he will be a priest forever. Verse 5, what does it say? Lord, Adonai, the Master, is at your right hand. He is beside you, meaning he is beside Jehovah. And once his enemies are destroyed, what's going to happen? He will crush kings, judge nations, and be declared the winner. Not by us, but by the Almighty Creator himself. And that simply hasn't happened yet. You know, it couldn't have, or we'd be living in that period of time that most people call the millennial reign, that 1,000-year reign of the Messiah. And I know that when a lot of people hear that, they say, oh, may he come swiftly and soon. But there's a reason that Amos said, don't rush it. Don't rush it. It's not going to be a pretty time. In fact, it's going to be pretty ugly. We get to verse 6. He will judge nations, heaping up the dead. He will crush the leaders far and wide. Now that's a little different than what Meyer read. He will judge nations, filling them with dead bodies. He will defeat the rulers of the world. That sounds like something we want to be part of now, doesn't it? I don't know. Doesn't sound very good to me. Doesn't sound that pretty to me. Right? You know, if it sounds pretty to you, well, can't help you with that. You know, have you read the end of Isaiah? Do you know what it says? As they go forth, they will see the corpses of men who have rebelled against me. For their worm will never die, their fire will never be quenched. They will be a horror to all mankind. That's what it's going to look like. That's what it's going to look like. You know, does that sound like something you want to hurry along? Does that sound like something you want to come very, very soon? I know a lot of Christians will say, oh, when Jesus comes back, there's going to be peace on earth. Not at first. That's not the way it happens. We know that it will eventually happen, but what happens first is exactly what our Creator has said will happen first. He is going to do some things. Sit at my right hand until it will be the Almighty himself who puts his enemies under control. Nothing that we can do is going to change that, because he has said it, he's promised it, and he's not going to change his mind. Now, there's some out there who think, oh, well, we don't have to worry about it. We're going to be taken away before all that happens. You realize you're coming back, right? Right? I don't go to Revelation very often, but Revelation 19, the armies of heaven dressed in fine linen, those aren't angels. Those aren't angels. They follow the one on the white horse. And what does it say in the next verse, verse 15? From his mouth proceeds a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter. He treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God, the Almighty. Are you familiar with Psalm 2? You will, verse 9, by the way, you will break them with an iron scepter. You will shatter them like pottery. Who is he going to break? Who's he going to shatter? He will judge the nations, heaping up the dead, from Psalm 110, verse 6. He will crush the leaders far and wide. The victory of any battle, of any war, is never pretty. It's never pretty. You know, I have seen pictures of the aftermath of the atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. It wasn't pretty. When I was in Europe many years ago, there was places, it still wasn't pretty 30 years after the war. I know a lot of people who have been to war, and when they come back, they all say the same thing. It's not pretty. It's not pretty. There is a very good reason in the United States where they have the VFW and the American Legion, and these folks sit around, and the reason they get together is because nobody has seen the things they've had. They're the things they've seen. Nobody's done the things they've done. But there is that camaraderie of seeing those things and being able to expose those things to each other that you can't to anybody else. War's not pretty, and that's what it's going to be. It's going to be the aftermath of war, but worse, because this is going to be the wrath of the Almighty. In the end, God wins. He gets to write the history. He gets to write the future. And we are not spectators. We are either willing participants or unwilling participants, but we're not spectators. You have to pick a side. You have to pick a side. So whose side do you want to be on? Well, if you want to be on the winning side, you already know you have to be on God's side, right? He's not going to be on your side. You have to be on God's side. You know, it doesn't matter what nation you live in. Doesn't matter what country you live in at all. Doesn't matter what ethnic group you're part of. Won't matter a bit. It's the people who choose the Creator and His way. It's the people who make the wise choices. They read what's here in the Bible and they say, I think it's better to win. I think it's better to be on the winning team. Because if you're on the losing team, you don't get to write the history. You don't get to write the future. And after God wins, there's no second chances. There's no second chances. You know, they just renamed a peak, if you can call it a peak. It's a 6,000-foot mountain in Smoky Mountain National Park. Been named after a colonel or a general or somebody for years. And the Cherokee Nation was able to get together and petition the right people, and they renamed this peak to what the Cherokee believe they used to call it. After God wins, you won't get to do that. There's no appeal. You don't get to go back and say, oh, can I have a do-over? It doesn't work like that. You see, it's the people who stand for the sacred word of the Creator. And they don't let anything or anyone change their mind, change the way they look, change the way they act. They don't let anybody take that word away from them. They don't let anybody change what the Almighty has said. Because He has said He will win. You know, He made this world. It's very easy for Him to just say, I give up and just squash it. But that's not who He is. It's not what He does. No, instead He says, I will find a way to take the ones who choose to be faithful to me and I'll put them on my team. You know, some people might think that Psalm 110, just a short little psalm, 7 verses, can't be that important, right? Well, Psalm 110 is what Yeshua, what Jesus uses to trick the Pharisees. And after he said what he said, they never asked him another question. They were done because they understood. They understood God wins. But it's even more important than that. Psalm 110 can answer questions. Yeah, it can answer questions. But more importantly, it's confirmation. It's confirmation that our Creator is in complete control of his creation, in complete control of everything. But he's not in complete control of everyone. He will win. And you will not like the aftermath, especially if you're on the losing team. Because if you lose, you don't get to write the history. If you lose, you won't have a future. Well, not a very pretty one. The Almighty's in control. He is the everlasting. He has the ability to do whatever he needs to make sure and make certain that his word and his promises are kept and carried out. He's not going to change his mind. Not for me, not for you, not for anybody else. We know his game plan. And you can either be part of it, or you can be one of the enemies that will wind up under the control of the one with the iron scepter who comes to crush nations, leaders of nations, kings, queens, presidents, doesn't matter. If you're not on God's side, you're on the wrong side. You're on the losing side. The winners do get to write the history. But with the Almighty, he also gets to write the future. And that is something to bear in mind. So until Monday, we do wish you many, many blessings, everyone.
Absolutely.